Stay away from the family dinner, my new wife texted coldly. Everyone's tired of you and your kids. Her sister reacted with a laughing emoji. I replied, then I'll stop funding the household. 10 minutes later, I paused the shared payments I'd been covering. They were laughing in the chat, but they didn't expect what happened next. My phone buzzed at 6:14 p.m. while I was sitting in the grocery store parking lot with 2 bags of food in the passenger seat and a rotisserie chicken cooling through the plastic lid. I remember the exact time because I looked at it twice. Once when the message came in. Once 10 minutes later when I turned off the payments. My name is Winfred. I'm 39. I'm a government auditor in Columbus, Ohio, which means my whole professional life is built on one boring talent that becomes very useful when people start lying. I notice numbers. I notice dates. I notice when the story changes by 3 inches and everybody pretends it didn't move. That night, I also noticed my hands went cold before I even opened the text. My new wife, Talia, had sent it in the family group chat she made 3 months after the wedding. The chat was called Home Team, which should have warned me. It was me, Talia, her sister Marin, and for some reason, Marin's husband Dev, who contributed almost nothing except reaction emojis and bad takes. I opened the message. Talia, stay away from the family dinner. Everyone's tired of you and your kids. I stared at it. Then Marin reacted with a laughing emoji. Just that. No words. Just a yellow face, crying with laughter, under a sentence about me and my children. My daughter Nessa was in the back seat with earbuds in, tapping her fingers on the window. My son Eli was beside her, building something with gum wrappers, because he was 11 and could turn boredom into engineering. They were waiting for me to drive us to the house I had been largely paying for since the wedding. Mortgage supplement, utilities, internet, 2-car insurance gaps, grocery card, preschool pickup fees for Marin's kid just this month, which somehow had become 6 months. My kids were quiet. That was the first bad sign. Kids get quiet when they think the adults are doing weather. Nessa leaned forward. Dad? I didn't answer right away because my mouth had gone dry. Dad, she said again, softer. Are we still going? I looked at the screen one more time. There were already 3 little typing dots. Then they vanished. Someone in that chat was deciding whether to make it worse. They didn't have to. It was enough. I typed one sentence. Me? Then I'll stop funding the household. Marin reacted to that with another laughing emoji. Dev added, lol dramatic. Then Talia wrote, please, don't threaten me with your moods. My brain counted automatically. Mortgage transfer, $1,850 on the first. Electric, auto pay from my account. Water, my account. Internet, my account. Streaming, grocery refill card, emergency school fee wallet, shared fuel card. I had put almost all of it in place because after the wedding, Talia cried in the laundry room and told me she was drowning. She said blending families was expensive. She said love meant building together. She said my stable salary was the one calm thing in the house. What she meant, I would later learn, was that my stable salary was the wall she leaned her whole family against. Dad? Eli asked. I turned in my seat. You too hungry? That got their attention because it was not an answer. Nessa pulled one earbud out. She was 13 and already had the face of someone who could smell dishonesty before it reached the table. What happened? I held up my phone. We're not going to dinner. Why? She asked. I didn't want to say it. Not with both of them looking at me. Not in a parked car that smelled like hot grocery bags and lemon cleaner. But my son had already read enough adult faces in his life. He said, did they say something about us? I hate how direct children can be when they're right. I looked back at my phone. My fingers were steady again. That was the second bad sign. When I get truly angry, I get calmer. I opened my banking app. At 6:24 p.m., I paused the grocery card. At 6:25 p.m., I removed the shared fuel transfer. At 6:26 p.m., I suspended the utility auto-pay backup connected to my personal account. At 6:27 p.m., I logged into the mortgage portal and revoked the supplemental automatic transfer that covered the shortfall Talia had temporarily needed every month. At 6:28 p.m., I screenshotted everything. At 6:29 p.m., the chat was still laughing. At 6:30 p.m., the first call came in. Talia. I let it ring out. Then Marin called. Then Dev. Then Talia again. Nessa watched my face the way kids do after something ugly gets said. Like she was checking whether the floor was still attached to the house. Eli asked, "Are we in trouble?" I turned off the car and faced them fully. "No," I said. "Not us." The phone buzzed again. "Talia, what did you just do?" Then, "Talia, Winfred, answer me." Then, "Marin, you cannot be serious." Then, Dev, "Dude, turn the cards back on." I looked at the chicken, the grocery bags, my son's bent gum wrappers, my daughter trying not to ask the next question. Then, I said very calmly, "We're going to eat somewhere else." "Like, where?" Eli asked. I started the car. "Somewhere nobody's tired of you." I didn't scream. I drove past the house I'd been paying for and took my kids to a steak place off Route 23 while my phone lit up like a building alarm. I met Talia 18 months earlier at a district compliance workshop where nobody wanted to be there and everybody pretended the coffee wasn't terrible. She was 34, worked part-time for a dental office, had a quick smile, and knew how to make exhaustion sound like sincerity. That matters more than people admit. The most dangerous adults are often the ones who sound reasonable while asking for something that should make you stop. I was a widower by then. That word still felt borrowed. My first wife, Janine, died 4 years earlier from a pulmonary embolism, 2 weeks after what was supposed to be a routine surgery. 1 month, I was buying soccer cleats. The next, I was learning which casseroles freeze best and how to answer questions children ask at 2 a.m. when they can't bear the shape of the world anymore. So yes, I was vulnerable. Not in the dramatic sense. I wasn't wandering around begging to be loved. I was functioning, working, packing lunches, signing field trip forms, keeping track of inhaler refills, dentist appointments, reading logs, and grief that came in sideways. I was doing what a lot of people do. I was tired enough to mistake relief for trust. Talia was easy at first. She said things like, "You don't have to do everything alone." She told Nessa, "I like how smart you are," which was the correct thing to say to a 13-year-old who hated fake sweetness. She told Eli, "You explain things like a professor," and he glowed for a week. She was warm with my kids in public. She was patient when we took things slow. She never pushed too hard in ways I could name. What she did do was tell me a carefully edited story about her family. Her father gone, her mother complicated, her sister Marin kind but chaotic, her family close in a messy way. That turned out to mean they traveled in a pack and called dependency love. 3 months into dating, I first heard the family language. Marin had called while Talia and I were cooking at my place. Talia answered on speaker because her hands were covered in marinade. "I just need help smoothing something over," Marin said. That word, smoothing. I didn't know then that in their family, smooth meant someone else pays. Talia sighed. "How much?" "Only 400. It was never only anything. Later that night, Talia said, "Marin's trying. She just gets overwhelmed." I said nothing because $400 to me was a number, but to a family that always seemed one emergency away from disaster, it was also a pattern. Then came Incident 1. 6 weeks after we got engaged, I found out I was paying Marin's internet. Not directly, indirectly, which is how people like that prefer it. Talia said her own bill had spiked weirdly and asked if I could cover it that month, because payroll had been off. I transferred the money. 2 nights later, I was at Marin's place helping move a dresser, and saw the same provider's overdue notice on her kitchen counter with Talia's handwriting on the envelope. I asked Talia in the car, "Why is your handwriting on your sister's bill?" She laughed too fast. "Oh my God, are you auditing me now?" Not a real answer. I should have pushed harder. Instead, I let her kiss my cheek and call me intense. That was my mistake. I thought dishonesty had to look bigger than that. Incident 2 happened after the wedding. We married at City Hall on a Thursday in March. Simple, quiet, kids dressed up, dinner after. Talia cried during the vows. Nessa cried because Talia cried. Eli wore a tie and looked miserable and brave. For one evening, it seemed possible that grief and hope could share a table without knocking it over. Then, 3 weeks later, Talia said the mortgage on her house was short. Not my house. Hers. She had owned it before we met. A narrow 2-story place in Worthington, with a cracked back patio and a kitchen that always smelled faintly like vanilla candles trying to cover mildew. She framed it as temporary, just until the insurance thing clears. What insurance thing? I asked. The old claim with the roof. What claim? She pressed her lips together. Winfred, do you have to make this feel like an interview? That was another family phrase. Don't make a scene. It never meant yelling. It meant don't ask for clarity that embarrasses the liar. I paid the shortfall because we were married and because 2 children had just been asked to trust a new adult in their home life. Then Marin started appearing at the house more often. Then Marin's son, Bray, started sleeping over more often. Then Marin's laundry was in our basement. Then Dev was in the garage, just fixing something every other weekend. Then my grocery bill doubled. Then tripled. When I brought it up, Talia would say, "They're family." I'd answer, "So are Nessa and Eli." She always had the same look then, mildly wounded, like I'd made things ugly by describing them accurately. The third incident was the one I should have treated as the fire alarm. Nessa came to me one Saturday morning and said, "Did you tell Talia she could give my room to Bray when I'm at Mom's grave?" That sentence rearranged my spine. What? She repeated it exactly. Did you tell Talia she could give my room to Bray when I'm at Mom's grave? Every year, on Janine's birthday, I took the kids to the cemetery in the morning. Quiet. Flowers. Sometimes tears, sometimes silence. That year, when we got back, Bray had his game console on Nessa's desk and his shoes on her bed. Talia said it was just for the afternoon. He needed space. Nessa stood there very still, backpack hanging from one shoulder, staring at a strange boy's socks on her blanket. "Why my room?" she asked. Talia smiled the way she always smiled when she wanted a child to feel unreasonable. "Because you weren't using it." That line hit me in the chest because it was so familiar. Practical. Calm. Cruel. I said, "Move his things now." Talia said, "You're overreacting." Nessa said nothing. She just picked up the framed photo of her mother from the shelf and held it against her ribs the whole time Talia cleaned up. That was the moment I realized my daughter was learning to shrink. That is one of the ugliest things an adult can teach a child. Later that night, I told Talia, "My kids do not lose ground in their own lives to make your family comfortable." She cried. Not from guilt, from frustration. "You always make me feel like I'm choosing," she said. "You are," I told her. She went quiet after that, but not in a healed way, in a bookkeeping way. I know that now. I thought it was temporary. It wasn't. By summer, the household had settled into a structure nobody had openly agreed to, but everybody benefited from except me and my children. I paid. Talia managed the emotional narrative. Marin drifted in and out with need. Dev acted like any objection from me was bad masculinity. Bray took up space the way boys do when nobody teaches them limits. My children learned to ask before using things in a house where other people never asked at all. And because I'm a government auditor, because I spend my days tracing patterns through expense reports and procurement memos and miscellaneous line items that somehow always hide the real story, I started doing something I didn't tell anyone about. I documented. Nothing dramatic at first. A folder on my laptop, a subfolder in cloud storage, screenshots of transfer requests, photos of grocery receipts, text threads, dates, amounts, who asked, what reason they gave, what the money actually went to. I told myself it was just for clarity. That was only half true. The other half was this. Some part of me already knew I was living inside a false set of books. At the steak place, my kids ordered fries they didn't really want and stared at the menus longer than necessary, because children know when dinner is no longer about dinner. My phone kept buzzing on the table face down. I let it. Eli finally asked, "Are we going home after this?" That question sat there. Home is a dangerous word when adults have made it conditional. I said, "We're not going back tonight." Nessa stopped moving entirely. Because of what she texted? I nodded. She looked down at her water glass. Okay, no drama. No tears. Just a 13-year-old filing away proof that she had correctly assessed the room months earlier. That hurt more than crying would have. I texted my neighbor Curtis, who lived 2 doors down from my townhouse in Dublin, the one I had kept after the marriage, because I'm not reckless with assets, only with hope. Me, you home, need a favor. Can you turn on heat at my place? Bringing kids there tonight. He replied in 30 seconds. Curtis, yep. Everything okay? Me, no. But it will be. That was wave 1. Private pressure. By the time the check came, I had 16 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 28 texts. The language was exactly what I expected. Talia, you're humiliating me. Talia, people are here. Talia, my sister used the card at the grocery store, and it declined in front of everyone. Good. Marin, this is abuse. That one almost made me laugh. Dev, real men don't retaliate against women and kids. I typed back one line. Me, real men don't fund adults who mock their children. Then I muted the chat. When we got to the townhouse, Curtis had left the porch light on and put 2 frozen pizzas on the kitchen counter from his own freezer because he understood something important. Sometimes help is not conversation. Sometimes help is heat and food and no questions. Nessa went upstairs with her backpack. Eli walked the living room perimeter as if checking whether his old life still fit. Then he sat on the couch and said, "This place smells like the old us." I had to turn away for a second. That night, at 10:11 p.m., Talia started the second tactic. Reasonable voice. She sent a long message. I was angry, and I shouldn't have said it like that. Everybody was stressed. Marin had already been drinking wine, and she took it too far. I never meant your children weren't welcome. I meant the tension has been hard on everyone. Please don't blow up our marriage over one bad text. There it was. The rewrite. Not I said something unforgivable. Just I shouldn't have said it like that. I replied with a question. Who is everyone? She didn't answer. So I asked the concrete version. Name who is tired of me and my kids. No answer. Then, are Marin and Dev living off household expenses I cover? Dots. Then nothing. Then, did you discuss me in advance before sending that message? Still nothing. That told me more than any paragraph would have. The next morning, I got the first practical confirmation. At 7:42 a.m., I received an email from the mortgage portal informing me that a manual payment attempt had failed due to insufficient linked funding approval. I knew exactly who had tried it. At 8:03 a.m., Talia called from a blocked number. I answered this time. Winfred, she said immediately, voice low and controlled. Turn the payments back on. No. Silence. Then, you've made your point. My point, I said, was that you told me to stay away because everyone was tired of me and my children. You are doing this overwording. I'm doing this overstructure. That made her exhale sharply. Can you not talk to me like I'm one of your audits? I said. Then stop treating me like a funding source with feelings attached. She tried guilt. Bray needs his asthma prescription picked up. His mother can pay for it. We are a household. No, I said. We were a household. You informed me yesterday that my children and I are a tolerated burden. Do not twist this. I got very quiet. Where does my money go every month, Talia? No answer. I asked again. Where? Bills. Which bills? All the house bills, then send me the breakdown. She hung up. That was the moment hope died for good, because an innocent person will usually over-explain. A guilty one leaves. I took the day off work. Officially, personal leave. Unofficially, forensic cleanup of my own life. I opened the folder I'd been building. I made a spreadsheet. Date. Request. Stated reason. Actual use if known. Amount. Evidence. It was almost soothing. Numbers are cleaner than feelings. Then I started collecting fresh receipts. I pulled 6 months of bank statements. I matched transfers to text requests. I found 3 recurring payment streams I had forgotten I'd authorized during temporary emergencies. One was going to a utility account not in Talia's name, Marin's. One was a car note assist routed through a joint payment app, Dev's truck. One was a daycare subsidy transfer that Talia had called school support. It wasn't school. It was Marin's late fee balance. I printed everything. At noon, Nessa came downstairs in socks and one of my old t-shirts. Are we moving back? No. She nodded once. Okay. Then, because she was her mother's daughter in the ways that still knock the air out of me, she asked, "Are you going to prove it or just leave?" I looked at her. Prove what? That they used you. That question came from a child, but not a childish one. I said both. Around 1:30 p.m., Wave 2 started. Practical Harm, my sister-in-law Marin, posted on social media. Not naming me, of course. People like that are always cowards with punctuation. She wrote, "Imagine abandoning women and children because you got criticized once." Then, a selfie from Talia's kitchen with the caption, "Funny how money makes men think they own people." I screenshotted it. Then Dev sent me a photo of my own spare tool set in his garage with the text, "Come get your toys when you calm down." Interesting choice. At 2:14 p.m., my daughter Nessa got a text from Bray. "Your dad is psycho." I took her phone, asked permission first, and screenshotted it. At 2:19 p.m., Eli got a game platform message from Bray. "Guess, dad isn't rich anymore. Lol." Screenshotted. At 2:40 p.m., my HR department emailed me, asking if I was aware of a concerning anonymous message sent to the public ethics inbox alleging misuse of state audit travel reimbursement. I stared at that email for a full 5 seconds. Then I smiled, because that was stupid. Very stupid. I know my reimbursements like priests know prayers. Every mile logged, every receipt attached. I audit municipalities for a living. I am not getting taken down by a woman who thinks a screenshot of a gas station purchase is blackmail. But it also told me something important. They were panicking, and panicked people widen the scene. I called HR. "Forward me the complaint," I said. The director hesitated. It came from a free email address. Forwarded anyway. 2 minutes later, I had it. The writing style was almost certainly Dev's. Fake formal, too many words, wrong statute citation. I saved it. By 3 p.m., Talia's tone changed again. She came to the townhouse. I saw her on the doorbell camera first. Coat on, hair done, looking composed. That alone told me she expected negotiation. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. She looked past my shoulder immediately. "I want to talk to the kids." No. Her face shifted. "You don't get to keep them from me because of an argument. You told their father everyone was tired of them." I was angry. You were revealing. She crossed her arms. "You love sounding superior." "No," I said. "I love nouns and verbs. They help." She tried a different route. Softer voice. "Winfred, I made one mistake." I said nothing. "One text," she continued. "One bad moment. And you've frozen the whole house." "Not the whole house. Only the parts I was carrying." She stepped closer. "Marin can't fill her car. Bray's prescription isn't covered. The electric draft failed. Do you understand what you've done?" That was the cleanest sentence she'd given me yet. I looked at her and asked, "Why did Marin's car, Bray's prescription, and your electric bill all depend on me if this was our marriage and not your family's operation?" Her jaw tightened. "There it is," I said. "What?" "The part where you stop answering." She lowered her voice. "Do not do this out here." I almost laughed. "Again, don't make a scene." I said, "Bring me a full list of household expenses, all outside beneficiaries of my transfers, and an explanation for the anonymous complaint to my employer." Her eyes flicked once. Tiny, fast. "Got you." "What complaint?" she asked. I held her gaze. Exactly. For the first time since I met her, Talia looked sloppy, not emotionally, strategically. She said, "You're being paranoid." I said, "And you're on camera." She glanced at the doorbell. Then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. Not warmly, not apologetically. Cold. "Fine," she said. "Since you want details, here's one. You're not actually on that house title, Winfred. You have no claim. So if you think you're going to walk in there and inventory things, Don't. I went still, because I had not asked about title, which meant she'd been discussing it already. That told me there was more. I said, "Who told you I wanted inventory?" She realized it a second too late. Then she recovered. "I know how you think." "No," I said. "You know what's in the house that shouldn't be there." She turned and walked to her car. I called after her once. "Show me the books, Talia." She got in without answering. That's when I stopped arguing and started documenting for war. I did not go to the police first. I went to the county recorder's office website. Then the clerk. Then a real estate attorney I knew from an old compliance case. Not socially, but professionally enough that when I said, "I need a factual answer, not a comforting one," he gave me one. His name was Mark Ellison. 58. Dry voice. Good suits. No patience for melodrama. By 11 a.m. the next day, I was in his office with a binder, my laptop, and 3 printed screenshots clipped on top. He flipped through the payment history. "You've been contributing to a house owned solely by your wife," he said. "Yes." "You have a paper trail." "Yes." "You also have text language implying she relied on you for essential carrying costs." "Yes." He nodded. Messy, but useful. Then I told him the part that changed his face. "I think there may be another lien or undisclosed borrowing tied to the property or the household." She reacted before I raised title. He leaned back. "Why do you think that?" "Because guilty people answer the question you haven't asked yet." He looked at me for a second. "What do you do again?" "Government auditor." "That tracks." He made one phone call from his desk. Then he asked an assistant for a title poll and public filing summary. We waited 12 minutes. Then the assistant walked in with 3 pages. Mark scanned the first one and said, "Well, what?" He slid it across the desk. There was a home equity line of credit filed 7 weeks after our wedding. Not in my name, in Talia's, for $96,000. I stared at it. The room went very quiet. "Did you know about this?" Mark asked. "No." "Did you sign anything related to renovations, debt restructuring, or emergency consolidation?" "No." He tapped the page. "Because this was secured against the house after you began paying major carrying costs. You weren't legally required for consent if you weren't on title, but if she induced you to contribute under false pretenses while concealing material debt, that creates a different conversation." I looked at the number again. $96,000. No roof claim, no temporary shortfall, no mystery. Just debt. And suddenly, the grocery card, the utility panic, the constant temporary emergencies all snapped into place like magnets finding each other. I asked, "Can we see where it went?" "Not without discovery or voluntary records," he said. "But your screenshots may help if those funds were represented one way and used another." I handed him my binder. He flipped. Transfer requests, crisis language, utility demands, school fee lies, car payment assist, child care excuses, my employer complaint, social media posts, the text telling me to stay away because everyone was tired of me and my kids. Then he stopped at the screenshot of Talia's message. He read it again. Then he said, "Do your kids have belongings there?" "Yes." "Important ones?" "Yes." "Go today and get them. Take a civil standby if you think there'll be a fight." I said, "There'll be a fight." Good instincts. I called the non-emergency line and requested a civil standby for property retrieval due to marital conflict. I used simple nouns, not feelings, not betrayal, just facts. At 3:20 p.m., an officer met me outside the house. Officer Ramirez, mid-40s, efficient, not interested in anybody's family mythology. Talia's SUV was in the driveway, Marin's car too, Dev's truck, full audience. Of course, Officer Ramirez said, "You're retrieving personal property only. Yes? No arguments. No touching. No side speeches." "Understood." He knocked. Talia opened the door and visibly recoiled when she saw the uniform. "What is this?" she demanded. Officer Ramirez said, "Civil standby. He's here to retrieve personal and children's property." Talia turned to me. "You called the police on your wife?" "No," I said. "I called the police on a situation." Marin appeared behind her, already furious. "This is insane." Officer Ramirez looked at her once. Ma'am, unless your name is on the request, I don't need commentary. That was the first line all week that made my shoulders unclench. I went inside with 2 duffel bags and a printed list. Nessa's keepsake box, Eli's robotics kit, their medication bag, school laptops, birth certificates from the office drawer, Janine's photo albums from the hall cabinet, my work files, my father's watch, tax records. I had made the list the night before because anger without structure becomes theater, and I had no intention of giving them theater. Talia followed me room to room. This is humiliating. You keep using that word, I said. What you mean is visible, Marin snapped. You froze a house over one text. I opened the office drawer and found it empty. I looked at Talia. Where are the certificates? She folded her arms. I don't know. I turned to Officer Ramirez, who was standing in the doorway with the posture of a man who has seen every version of domestic dishonesty. My children's birth certificates were in this drawer 2 days ago. He looked at Talia. Do you know where they are? She said, no. Then Eli, who had insisted on coming because he wanted his robotics kit, and because children know when adults are hiding their property, said quietly from the hall, they're in the upstairs linen closet. Everyone turned. He blinked. I saw Marin put the folder there when she said you'd take everything if you got dramatic. Silence. Real silence this time. Officer Ramirez said, show me. Eli did. Second shelf. Under towels. Blue accordion file. Ramirez pulled it out himself. He opened it. Birth certificates. Social security cards. Passports. My mouth went cold. Because that is not clutter. That is not misplacement. That is containment. Officer Ramirez looked at Talia and Marin in a way that changed the oxygen in the house. Then he said one short, devastating sentence. Why were identity documents hidden in a linen closet? Nobody answered. Dev tried from the stairs. It's not hidden. It's just stored. Ramirez didn't even look at him. Sir, that was not a good sentence. I took the file from him with hands that were suddenly too steady. And then I knew this wasn't just freeloading. This was planning. I looked at Talia. Were you going to stop me from taking my kids? Her face did the tiniest thing. The tiniest thing. Enough, she said. Don't be ridiculous. I said, then why were there passports with the certificates? No answer. Marin jumped in. Because we didn't trust you not to disappear with money. Officer Ramirez turned to her. Ma'am, you are making this worse. I believed him. Then the second break came. In the office closet, behind a stack of gift bags, I found a locked cash box I recognized as mine. My late father had given it to me years ago for tax records and backup cash. I hadn't seen it in months. Talia had said she thought it was still in storage. It was not in storage. It was in her office. I said, I want that opened. Talia said, that's private. Ramirez said, whose box is it? Mine, I said. I described the key, the scratch on the bottom, the envelope label inside. Talia refused. Ramirez said, open it or I note refusal and ownership dispute in the incident summary. That got her. She got the key from the junk drawer. Inside were 3 things that made the whole room change shape. An envelope with $8,400 in cash from a consulting side job I had completed the previous fall and been unable to find after a closet cleanout. A folder containing printouts of my account balances and retirement estimate, and a legal pad page in Marin's handwriting. At the top, it said, if he leaves, if he cuts off money. Below it were bullets. Mortgage. Utilities. Use joint pity with church. Tell people kids unstable. Freeze documents. See if complaint to work sticks. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then, Talia said, too fast. That is not what it looks like. I turned to Officer Ramirez and handed him the page. He read it, then he read it again. Then he said, in the same dry tone, you may want to make copies of this immediately. I did better than copies. I photographed every inch. Talia reached for the page. Give me that. Ramirez stepped between us. No. Marin's face went white, then red. You had no right to go through private notes. I looked at her. You wrote a contingency plan for stealing my documents and damaging my employment. Dev finally lost control. Bro, Families plan all kinds of things. Officer Ramirez turned and said, "Sir, stop helping." That should have been funny. It wasn't. Because Nessa was standing in the hallway clutching her mother's photo album, watching adults reveal exactly what they were when the money stopped. I took one breath. Then I delivered the only sentence that mattered. From this point forward, you will contact me through counsel, and you will have no access to my children. Talia laughed once, sharp and ugly. You can't do that. I looked at the hidden passports in my hand. Yes, I said, I can. Immediate consequence came exactly the way these things always come when the performance fails. Door slamming. Dev shouting. Marin crying, but not from remorse. From exposure. Talia following me onto the porch hissing, "You are destroying this family." I turned around one last time. "No," I said. "I'm just ending your financing." That evening, Mark filed for emergency protective orders related to document interference and harassment. Not because they had physically harmed my children, not because I wanted drama. Because there was now written evidence of a coordinated plan to withhold identity documents, attack my employment, and manipulate custody optics through false instability claims. We also sent a litigation hold letter regarding financial records, communications, property access, and any deletions after the date of my text. Irreversible step. That's the part people never understand. The irreversible step is rarely loud. It is paperwork. It is passwords changed. It is account access revoked. It is school pickup lists updated. It is your children's records moved to a locked drawer in a different home. It is the group message you send after the lawyer signs off. At 8:42 p.m., I sent one sentence to the home team chat. Do not contact my children again. Then I left the chat. The first quiet thing that happened afterward was cereal. 3 mornings later, Eli poured his own bowl in the townhouse kitchen, looked around and said, "Nobody here takes the good spoon." That was his peace report. Nessa slept with her phone under her pillow for a week, then stopped. That was hers. My kids had been carrying more than I knew. Not just grief, not just adjustment. Surveillance. They had been learning the shape of a house where belonging could be revoked, depending on who needed money. Once that pressure was gone, small things came back. Eli left his robotics pieces on the dining table overnight, and nobody called him inconsiderate. Nessa played music in the shower. They laughed louder. Children tell the truth through volume. The legal part moved fast once the paper trail widened. Talia, through counsel, first claimed the note was venting. Then that Marin wrote it as a joke. Then that the passports had been placed in the linen closet after a recent attempt to organize household records. That one was my favorite. Organize, hide. Such close cousins. My attorney subpoenaed account records connected to the equity line and several payment apps. A month later, the broad shape appeared. Not every dollar, not yet, but enough. The $96,000 line had not gone to roof repairs. It had gone to debt consolidation, card balances, Marin's rent arrears, Dev's truck payoff assistance, a vacation deposit to Naples that I had never heard about, and furniture purchases Talia had described to me as borrowed from a friend. When Mark showed me the preliminary tracing summary, he said, "This is not a marriage under stress. This is a network." That was the right word. Not one bad sister, not one weak wife. A network. A system where every adult benefited from one person staying embarrassed enough not to ask plain questions. The complaint to my employer died in 4 days. Internal review found nothing except a malicious submission with fabricated allegations. HR asked if I wanted the matter referred out. I said yes. Not because I expected fireworks. Because paper should meet paper. School was easier than I feared. I met with the principal and the counselor. I brought the order, the attorney letter, and copies of the restricted pickup list. The principal read quietly, then asked, "Do the children know who is not allowed contact?" "Yes," I said. Nessa spoke before I could continue. "We know." The principal looked at her for a second and softened. "Okay, no speeches, no pity, just systems. That's what safety often is. Not emotion, systems." Talia tried one last tactic in October. A gift. Of course. A white bakery box left on my porch with a note taped to the top. For Eli and Nessa. They know I love them. Adults should not put children in the middle. No signature because cowards like implication. I photographed the box. Then I called Mark. Then I disposed of it unopened. That evening, Talia sent an email. Not to the kids. To me. You are poisoning them against me. They miss me. Marin misses them too. We were a family before you got vindictive. I read it once and replied with one sentence. Access to my children is not a family right. She wrote back 6 paragraphs. I never answered. 2 weeks later, Marin tried the church route exactly like her note had promised. A woman from their congregation called and said she was reaching out in love because reconciliation is powerful for children. I said, did anyone mention the hidden passports? Silence. Then, I may not know all the details. That makes 2 of us, I said, and ended the call. By Thanksgiving, the townhouse felt lived in again. Curtis came over with his sister and her twins. The kids played a board game that took forever and made no sense. I cooked too much food because that's apparently what I do when I want the world to feel answerable again. Nessa made the pie. Eli burned the rolls and acted like it was chemistry, not negligence. At one point, I looked around the table and noticed nobody was performing. Nobody was managing optics. Nobody was waiting to see if they were welcome. Nessa caught me looking and said, "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just counting." She smiled a little because she knew exactly what I meant. There was one more scene before the year ended. Family court hallway, gray chairs, bad coffee smell. Too much fluorescent light. Talia saw me with the kids and took one step forward like she meant to make an emotional display. Nessa moved closer to me automatically. Eli looked at the floor. That was all the information I needed. Talia said, "Can I at least say hi?" I answered before either child had to. No. Her face hardened. "You can't punish me forever." "This isn't punishment," I said. "It's access control." She stared at me like I was speaking another language. Maybe I was. In her language, love meant entry, even after contempt. In mine, love meant protection after proof. The hearing itself was uneventful, which is the best thing a hearing can be. Temporary boundaries extended. Financial matters continued. Evidence preserved. No contact with the children outside structured legal channels. When we got back to the car, Eli buckled in and asked, "Is it over?" I considered that. "No," I said, "but it's decided." He nodded like that was enough. Sometimes it is. I still think about that first text more than I want to. Not because it hurt my pride, because it simplified everything. People spend years waiting for a dramatic betrayal when what they usually get is a sentence. One sentence that reveals the structure you've been living inside the whole time. Stay away from the family dinner. That was the knife line. Not even the worst part of it. The worst part was everyone's tired of you and your kids. Because that was not anger. That was policy. And once I saw the policy, I stopped negotiating with it. There is no explosive ending where everybody claps and the villains collapse into dust. Real life is less cinematic and more satisfying than that. The house went into sale discussions because the debt load could no longer hide behind my transfers. Marin moved in with Dev's mother for a while. The church ladies found a new emergency to orbit. My employer kept me. My children kept their names, their documents, their routines, and the right to walk into a kitchen without feeling measured. As for me, I learned something I should have trusted sooner. You do not owe calm access to people who mock your children in private and use your labor in public. You do not owe infinite grace to adults who confuse dependence with entitlement. And you do not keep funding the machine that is teaching your children to get smaller. A month ago, Talia sent one final message through her attorney, suggesting a holiday reset dinner in the spirit of healing. I declined. Not angrily. Not theatrically. Just clearly. I'm not available for that. That is the whole moral, really. Some families survive on the hope that you will keep confusing love with permission. But love without safety is theater. And access to me, or to my children, is not a family right.